She returned to Winterfell at the ragged hem of winter, when light was spare and the wind spoke through the ruined crenels like a tired flute. The gatehouse still bore the scorch-lipped scars of siege and neglect, and the yard had gone lean and gray with frost. But when she passed beneath the stone wolves flanking the arch, she felt a pulse of warmth that had nothing to do with the brazier a stable boy coaxed to life with a bundle of twigs. She swung down from her pony and stood, bones humming from the road, the taste of iron in her mouth, the old courage pricking at her skin. She had known other names and other houses, had spoken with tongues that were not hers, had slept between strangers and woke as no one at all. But the smell of wet dog and oak smoke and trampled snow stripped it all away. She was Arya of Winterfell, and she had come home to end the noise that had gnawed the north to its ribs. The great hall kept a sullen fire. The rafters were dark with smoke. The rushes knew enough to whisper underfoot. And along the tables sat a dozen men and women who had once been banners in her brother's hand and had since been ash in a black wind. She knew faces by rumor before she learned them by sight, and some she had known as a child. There was Dave Malrick of Long Barrow, stooped and smelling of peat. There was Jonel Slate, whose hands had gone clawed with cold. There was grim Lady Helen of the Rills with hawk eyes and a mouth that never softened. She took her place beneath the wolf's head and laid needle on the table where any could see the line of it. Steel was not a claim by the old laws, but a true blade steadied a true tongue. A maester cleared his throat. He was thin and sharp as an icicle, and he had introduced himself as Kennet, letters new upon his chain. "My lady," he said, though it had come reluctant the first time. "The captains of the Outer Watch say there are riders from White Harbor 3 leagues behind you. They carry Lord Manderley's green. They'll be given bread and salt at the gate," Arya said. "The same for any man or woman who comes under my roof with an honest face and a clean knife. We have cut each other enough." At that, murmurs rippled the benches. The North had been fed on hard bread for years now. Oaths and grievances grown stale and brittle, swallowed because the only other thing on the table was hunger. She knew it by taste. It had sired a dozen petty wars, flared like brushfire and left circles of cold ash where halls had stood. The Boltons had made a flag of cruelty and stitched half the North to it with fear, and every old wrong that had once been a bruise had darkened to rot. She had not come only to pull a blade from that wound. She had come with thread and patience and the stubbornness of a winter root. "Bread and salt?" Lady Helen asked, voice carrying from the far table. "For the men who supped with the Freys? Bread and salt for any under my roof," Arya said. "Let's not make another war at the table. And if they bring knives hidden in their boots, I'll be watching their boots." That one half a laugh. The other half remained clenched like a fist. Arya left it so and went to the Godswood before the riders came, because there were words to speak under the weirwood that had nothing to do with men and their soft, loud cruelty. The heart tree stood in its white silence with its red mouth open to the snow. She laid 2 fingers to its bark and found it smooth as old bone. Her breath went pale and her voice thinner. "I'm home," she told the old gods, and then, because she had been honest in every place except her own, she added, "I am still what I learned, but I am yours, and I am theirs." She had not come to rule by the old measure of a lady. She had not come to sit and pour wine and embroider banners and forgive insult with a wet eye. She had learned the weight of a face and the worth of a promise, the cost of opening a throat and the cost of leaving it closed. So when the Manderley riders came in green and gray, and with them a square-shouldered man she knew to be Ser Marlon Manderley, she went to meet them in the yard and offered the ritual foods with her own hand. Ser Marlon accepted with dignity, eyes assessing and a mouth that softened when he smiled. "My lady," he said, as if the title were an oath spoken back to her. "My Lord Grandfather sends his sworn word and his hope that Winterfell will be more than a word in a dead man's mouth again." "It will be more than that," Arya said. "If your Lord Grandfather sits at my table without deceit, it will be home." They were joined by others in the following days. The Glovers with collars of snow, Karstark riders with their sunbursts stitched rough upon their cloaks, a scatter of hill clans, 2 Riswells with faces careful and clean, and a small hard woman with a bear on her breast who announced herself as Alysanne Mormont and brought 40 women with her, all of them square and stubborn and competent. When Alysanne met Arya's eyes, there was no bow. There was frank recognition, a measuring that made Arya feel seen as she had not been in the soft courts of the south. "Lady of Winterfell," Alysanne said, not to flatter but to test. "Alysanne of Bear Island," Arya said. "You came hungry for a fight. I came hungry to stop one." "Good," Arya said. "So did I." She called a moot in the great hall and made them swear before the weirwood that nothing spilled in the room would be blood. She named her terms in a voice as steady as a winter river. There was to be a truce under her roof. Any quarrel would be carried to the godswood and laid at the foot of the heart tree, where the old gods could make no mistake. No man would raise a banner against another without first sending word to Winterfell. Any wrong done would be paid, but paid by the guilty hand if such could be named, not by every throat with a shared name. She demanded wards, but not hostages. Children to be fostered under her eye, taught woodcraft and numbers and the first lessons in steel, so that they could take back to their dovecots and long halls a common language of the north that had nothing to do with feuds. And last she said, "We will find what is left of the Boltons and call them to account. We won't do it with flayed skins or songs at knives' ends. We'll make a law as hard as the season and as simple as a clean blade." Helen of the Rills spoke first. "A law is only a song the wolves sing until they're hungry," she said. "Who has the right to keep us to it?" "I do," Arya said, and allowed steel into her tone. "Winterfell does. The old gods do. And if that's not enough, then so do my eyes, and the eyes of the small folk who are tired of our grand mistakes. If you'll be ruled by nothing else, be ruled by shame. The North is not a butcher's shop." Alysanne Mormont thumped her fist on the table once. "Let the girl try," she said, and her teeth flashed. "If she fails, we have spears enough to remind her who feeds on Bear Island." Arya smiled back because she liked such honesty. "When I fail," she said, "tell me so to my face, but I mean to try." It began with small things that were not small. She had the mended gates open to hawkers and shepherds who had been turned away by men too proud to remember where their meat came from. She set the kitchen girls to baking loaves daily and passed them out at the gate with a lord's careless generosity. She had the smith rehang the broken bell at the sept so that the few south-loving faithful in the garrison could call their god by a familiar sound. Cost little and bought much. Men sloughed their war bravado when they watched their children curl in sleep belly full and unafraid for the first time in a season. More dangerous work followed. A letter came on a dirty scrap from a girl bold enough to pass it to a stable boy and run. A Risswell retainer skulking by night with messages for a rider who had taken to sleeping in the hayloft with his boots on. Arya read the hand by candlelight and felt a stillness spread through her. She had promised herself she would not spill blood under her roof. She did not have to. Facework had taught her how to be no one. It had also taught her how to be someone else when the world needed a face that lied. She found a boy in the yard with a clever step and a mouth quick enough to keep up. And before night fell, she had watched the retainer pass his second message to a maid with a braid and a blush who would carry it to a fisher at the river bend who was nothing of the kind. When she read the second letter, it sang of a meeting at the half-frozen ford with a bold promise at the end. The flayed hand has friends in Winterfell yet. The meeting at the ford never happened as planned. The maid stumbled into the mud, cursing, and dropped the bundle. The fisher who bent to help her met a small knife and a firmer hand, and his heel slipped on ice so that he fell into water up to his waist, spluttering oaths. Alysanne had men in the sedge with bows, and 2 arrows whispered into the dark as lightly as breath. No one died that night. Arya had chosen it so. The retainer woke the next morning to find his warhorse gone and his boots set neatly by his pallet and a single flayed glove pinned there with a river pebble. When she saw him at table that evening, his face had lost a decade of blood. He took his leave the following dawn without a word. Arya was waiting for him at the gate, needle on her hip, and she smiled as she would for any traveler. "Winters are long," she said. "Choose a good road." He chose the one that led south and did not stop. That bought her the time to write a proper letter to Lord Wyman Manderley. She did not beg. She told him of the ward she would take, the grain stores they would share, the ships she expected to see on the white knife bearing salt fish for hauls farther north, and the justice she intended to keep. She wrote that she would not be anyone's catspaw and that the Boltons would answer to Winterfell, not to a secret court held in a harbor hall. His reply came on heavier parchment, smelling faintly of lemon and ink, and it soothed while it tested. He could support such a law, he wrote, but only if all the great houses of the north swore it at one table and the words were carved into the heart tree's bark. Trees forget nothing, he wrote. So do girls, Arya said aloud when she read it and smiled without mirth. She called the houses to Winterfell at the turn of the moon. They brought their quarrels with them like bad weather. The Umbers snarled at Karstark men over a border that had wandered with a stream and a rumor. The Ryswells mistrusted Manderley gold. The clans looked upon them all with contempt that did not soften. Arya listened until the words made a bray in her head, then spoke over them because a lady's voice could be like a knife when it needed to be. "We will carve the law into the heart tree," she said. "It will be plain. First, no man will raise steel against his neighbor without first sending word to Winterfell and accepting a witness we choose together. Second, wrongs will be weighed as they are, not as they have been called, and paid by those who committed them. Blood will not be a purse that can be dipped for debts one man owes another. Third, children are not weapons. They will learn letters and woodcraft and the work of the hand in Winterfell for 2 winters and 2 summers. If they return with bigger words and steadier hands than their fathers had, then perhaps the North will be quieter for it." "And the Boltons?" Alysanne asked, practical as a sharpened point. "A law that ignores the worst of us is a house with no door. We'll stand them up in daylight," Arya said. "We'll call their crimes what they are, and we'll decide as a North how to answer them." The old gods listened without visible app. Roval. The wind moved a little in the red leaves. The carver, Jonel Slate, whose hands had uncurled enough to hold a chisel, asked for the final words. Arya gave them plain. "A winter truce," she said. "A pact to hold us steady until the ground softens and the small ones can run barefoot without bleeding." Jonel carved. The letters bit white into white, a scar upon a scar, and when he finished and stood back, none of it looked like poetry. Arya preferred it that way. The Boltons did not come to swear. They sent a letter heavy with the stink of a man's hand who loved the taste of fear, and the letter made boasts that reminded Arya of boys who killed their first rabbit and ran showing the blood for the joy of being more than a child. She burned the letter over a tight flame and said nothing until after the feast. Dramatic gestures fed men's hunger for more of the same. Quiet fed their better patience. On the 13th night after the law was cut, a raven came from Barrowton bearing Lady Dustin's seal. She would host a smaller council to learn what in Winterfell was new and what was old. Arya took that as the invitation it meant to be and rode with Alysanne and a handful of her own watch. She slept by the road and wrapped her cloak twice against a wind that bit at knuckles. And on the second night she dreamed of the house she had fled and the father she had loved and a hall that could be a refuge again. Waking hurt less than it used to. Barrowton had always looked to Winterfell with a cautious eye. Lady Dustin's mirth never quite reached her eyes. She poured wine and asked whether Arya meant to bind the North with clever words like a southern court might. "Words fray in weather," she said, smiling. "So do flayed banners," Arya said. "I'm making rope, not lace." Lady Dustin gave the small, fierce laugh of a woman who respects an answer even if she plans to test it. "How many ropes will you need to haul the dread fort down?" "None," Arya said. "Just time, and light, and a few things said plainly out where children can hear." The light came from an unexpected quarter. A Karstark rider brought a boy to Winterfell, sallow and tight-faced, who had escaped a camp by the Weeping Water where men loyal to a Bolton captain were practicing an old sport. It was not flaying. Arya had forbidden herself even to think that word where children might hear it, but it was a cruelty that turned the stomach. The boy's hands trembled when he drank the hot broth she pressed upon him. He told his tale spilling and stiff by turns. Alysanne's jaw bent with the telling. "We have enough names," she said afterward. "The law carves both ways. Let's see if it holds." They did not raid the camp by night. They went in daylight with 20 witnesses from as many houses. They set their camp where any might see it. They announced themselves and sat until their presence made a noise like thunder in the Bolton captain's skull. He came out to bluster, and blustered less when 6 of the witnesses turned out to be women who could split a man's skull and had done so. A man can sneer at a rival's pride. He will think twice before sneering at the patience of those beside him. Arya read the boy's words again, this time with every careless phrase called by its right name, and asked the captain if he would allow a trial at the heart tree nearest to hand. He refused and reached for a hilt. Alysanne knocked the blade from his hand. No blood fell. The captain stared at the ring of witnesses and saw that what he had called power had grown thin. They brought him to the nearest godswood and spoke him down. He shook when the sentence came, though it was less than he would have given another. Confiscation of gear, public naming, banishment from service under any arm bearing a Bolton flayed man, and a winter's labor on White Harbor's docks under a bailiff who took his duty seriously. The captain spat. Alysanne dragged him to water's edge by the scruff of his cloak. The spittle washed away. Seeing that small justice made a larger quiet under the trees. The boy drank more broth and slept in the hay. 2 dogs pressed to his side and the older one snoring like a saw. Word traveled faster than ravens. That camp emptied by the next morning. Others sent back careful answers to raven letters that had carried none of the old fear. The law Arya had carved was not a miracle. It was a fence set upright by many hands against an old wind. It held sometimes with the help of good men, and sometimes it held because children had begun to say they would not marry men who could not keep their tongues behind their teeth and their knives behind their belts. A small thing, except that small things had gotten them into this misery. A slight at a feast, a calf taken unfair, a word left unanswered until it hardened to a feud. Now small things turned the other way. There were relapses. A pair of umbers brawled with Karstark boys at a winter market, and a knife came out of a sleeve. Arya walked between them with her blade sheathed and a gaze so unfriendly that it shamed them into looking for their good sense on the ground. She made them pick up spilled apples together and had them sell the bruised ones at half price, and she kept them in her sight long enough to hear one crack the first weak joke. Laughter turned, as it always does when fear loosens its hold, to an argument about which sow had more meat on her in the spring. She preferred such arguments. They fed men rather than feeding on them. When the second moon after the carving had thinned to a hook, the last loud man wearing a Bolton badge came to the Winterfell gate with 4 followers and a sneer he had polished for years. He asked for single combat as if warriors were songs and not people. Arya wanted to refuse. There is a deep stupidity in choosing to let one man's bravado set fire to a hall. But there are traditions that need to be answered with something older than refuse. Sal. She took him into the yard with the witnesses circled thick and a patch of clean snow between them. He blinked when she named her own blade. Not needle, not a girl's toy, but the old sword they had hung above the hearth, heavy and dinged by long years. She had learned small, fast work in dark places. She had learned bigger movements in the daylight since. He expected a dance. She gave him one step of it, a feint, and then the weight of the heavy sword coming down not on his shoulder where death would have been, but on his wrist. The bones broke with a dry last day of ice sound. He fell to his knees in snow and relief, not because she would spare him, but because he understood that he had been engineered away from his own worst choice. He did not die. He served a hard winter hauling timber with his opposite hand until his back was a map of imprecise penance. When he left, sent, not banished. He looked back once at Winterfell with an expression that had a few more years in it than his face. So the North's loudest war dwindled to murmurs. It did not vanish. It grew manageable. Houses sent wards who learned to play stones together and argued about whose island had better fish and which hill gave the wind more teeth. The gods would herd trials that began in anger and ended in something like exhaustion. Arya kept her eyes wide for every small trick and every honest failure. She made examples and she made soup. When asked whom she would marry, she said nothing, then said, enough times to be its own law. I will marry the work. If a man wants to stand beside me, he can bring a strong back and a clean blade and he can listen. Few laughed, fewer argued. It was hard to quarrel with a woman who could look you in the eye and remember what you had looked like when you were 10 and singing for bread at your mother's knee. In the third winter after her return, when the ice on the moat split with a sound like the cracking of an old oath and the smoke from the chimneys went straight up for 3 days together, they held a feast that was not a council. There was song, and even Lady Helen's mouth eased. Children darted between benches like minnows. Alisane arm-wrestled a Riswell and lost and laughed like a bear seeing spring. Arya sat beneath the wolf and watched her people argue over the right way to stew turnips. And something unclenched in her that had been clenched since her first day on the road. After the pies, meat, not memory. Ser Marlon Manderly lifted a horn and said in a voice that filled the rafters, "The North has found the bone under its meat again." Later, when the hall was emptied of all but dogs and embers, Arya went to the godswood and sat with her back against the heart tree. The red leaves remembered the knife she had never used and the names she had learned and put away. She touched the smooth bark and spoke into the cold. "I was a point," she said softly. "We needed a needle before. We needed a net after." The tree did not answer. It did not have to. She could hear the answer in the ordinary sounds from the yards beyond. A horse stamping in its stall, a stable boy muttering a song as he rubbed a bit with snow, a pair of wards arguing about a line in a book. Peace was not a song. It was a dozen small sounds, each no louder than a breath, and all of them stubborn as winter. She woke the next morning to a sky the color of pewter and a light that was thin but steady. Men came to her with petitions about woodlets and marriages. Women came to her with children and the courage to say what their husbands would not. Arya listened, weighed, decided, sent people away with more hope than they had brought. When she lifted her eyes to the wolf above the hearth, its jaw shadowed by the angle of the light, she did not think of glory. She thought of the way bread went brown when it was properly turned, the way letters lined straight when written onto good parchment, the way a man's voice changed when he understood he would be forgiven and held to account in the same breath. She had done what wars could not. She had ended one by folding it into the work of living. Her father would have said it plain. There is nothing noble in a woman who rules so that bards will sing. There is something holy in a girl who cleans a wound and keeps it clean until it knits. She rose, buckled on the blade that had become mostly a reminder and hardly ever a remedy, and stepped into a yard busy with small work. The wind cut the same as ever. The castle held it off the same as ever. Listening, she could hear a boy shouting to a girl on the far side of the well, asking if she meant to be a captain or a maester. The girl shouted back that she meant to be both. Arya smiled and let that answer stand for the day. The day held. So did Winterfell. So did she. They meant to kill him with a spectacle. The boy king had a mouth like a cruel fruit and a sword drawn halfway from its scabbard by that same mouth. And the sept had filled with a heat that had nothing to do with candles. Eddard Stark kept his eyes on the stones where the light from the high windows bled into gray, and did not feel the rope on his wrists so much as the weight of the city leaning forward to see the end of honor. He spoke what he must to save his daughter, false words in a true tongue, and then the shudder in the crowd ran through him as a sword came free and a shout rose like a boil. The blow did not fall. It was not mercy. It was a hinge. Later, when the stink of the black cells had seeped past his teeth and into his bones, a small man stood where light had no right to be and said, not unkindly, "You have daughters. The city has needs. Let me help you fail in a way that saves both." He swallowed the retort that reached for his tongue. He had not come south for wrangles. He had come to tell a king a truth about other children and the folly of claiming what did not belong to you. The truth had not held. He could choose a qui. Dir trufi. He allowed himself to be smuggled not as a lord but as a piece of cargo whose value lay in not being inventoried. He remembered the heads they had set along the city's walls. He walked away from them because staying was the same as giving his neck to the sword a lazier man would swing tomorrow. He left a daughter behind, and there is no excuse a man can make to himself that will turn that fact into wisdom. He folded the knowledge into himself the way a man sets a crooked finger with a sharp pull and a cool rag. It never healed straight. It fit his hand anyway. The river carried him out under a sky that seemed too large for the city's small ugliness. He lay under sacks that smelled of onions and rope and listened to the dull knock of water against planks until the rhythm turned from escape to motion. A man who called himself a boatman and meant something else rowed in short, efficient strokes that did not waste him. He did not speak a kindness to Ned and was kinder for it. On the second night, they beached by broken reeds and built no fire. The boatman chewed on a strip of something that tasted vaguely of fish and said, "They will think you went to the wall. Let them." "I meant to go," Ned said, "because lies do not sit well in the mouth of a man like him for long." "I know. That's why you didn't." At White Harbor, he did not enter by the river gate as a lord. He came in with sacks of grain that had been laid thin in the hold and stacked high above where he lay, a man once large with comfort who had grown spare with need. He emerged smelling of dust as old as the world and was met by a boy with quick eyes and a careful purse. He handed over a small coin that bought him the right to be nobody for 2 days. On the second night, a guard with manderly silverfish on his breast brought him to a cellar with a barrel of lemons against the wall and a set of scales hung perfectly even. Wyman's son received him, eyes thoughtful and fatigue riding him like a cloak. "My father bids you welcome," he said in a voice that held something of the weight of the man it cited. "He bids you eat and listen as well. The north is a field full of stumps. You're not the first man to try to plow it lately, but you're the first one to come back with a plow in your hands instead of a torch." Ned took the bread. He did not know yet if he would earn the praise. News came like ice cracking under a footstep. Not loud enough, and then all at once. Rob, too tall, too fast, and with a laugh he had gotten from his mother, had marched south at the head of men who loved him less for his crown than for the way he could ride into their courage and make it larger. Rob had died in a hall full of candles and breadcrumbs and lies. Caitlin had died with him, and no man's description of that death could make it small enough to fit in Ned's throat. He wanted a sword. He wanted a pyre. He wanted to go still the way of the reeds and sink into quiet. He wanted what men want when all the good sense they spent their lives storing is stripped from them in an hour. He took none of those things. He asked for a map. "We take our revenge when we are weakest," Wyman said, looking fat and kind and nothing like the man the world mistook him for. "Or else we never take it at all." "Revenge is a hot word," Ned said. "I'm cold enough to say justice. Call it what you will, if the doing is the same." It was not. The difference lay not in the bodies that would fall. They would, and he would count each one, so much as in how men would walk afterward. Revenge is a storm. Justice is weather. One tears up trees for the pleasure of seeing roots. The other visits every season and makes men work if they want to live. Ned had lived long enough to prefer weather. He asked Wyman for ships, for silence, for time. He went to the neck because a man builds a house by checking the foundation before he repairs the roof. Howland Reed met him in water to his knees and an expression like a knot in a good piece of wood. "You learned finally what the South does to men like you," he said. "I learned it sooner. And yet here I am," Ned said, and allowed himself half a smile. "And here you are, which means we both have work." They worked by inches at first. Men like Roose Bolton build their domains with care. You cannot pull down such a thing with a single tug without it falling on your head. The reeds made the phrase into fools where they were weakest, on ground that would not carry horses or hurry. Carts sank where they had counted on mud to be manageable. Guides led them to green paths that were not paths at all. A dozen small humiliations followed, none deadly, all wearying. A soldier who must sleep with his boots on for a fortnight learns to despise more efficiently than he learns to hate. And despising sours obedience. Ned chose men who were capable of boredom and set them to tasks that required it. He called in vows carefully, as if he were plucking strings on a favorite harp. He did not yank them. Great John Umber answered with a roar and a grim grin that had been missing something like laughter since a wedding that had no right to call itself such. The Mormonts sent a ship and a woman captain who disapproved of what men had done with the last few years and intended to fix it with discipline. The Hill clans came because they remembered meat on the table and wanted to taste it again. The Boltons were not stupid. They were what happens when a man learns the wrong lesson from fear. They built a response by piling cruelty where craft would serve better. Ned avoided their main host and took the small ones apart. He did not decapitate, he instructed. A captain caught with a purse of coin he had taken from the widow whose barn he'd burned found his hand pinned to a post by a hammer he had used to build no one's shelter. Ned would not have his men cut the hand free. He had them lift the post and carry the man to tea. He woman's new barn and set it at the threshold. He was made to watch while men from 3 houses raised the first trusses. That day the North learned 2 things about their Lord returned. He would be harder than mercy and kinder than habit. He made time his ally. He gathered the slow, stubborn wealth of winter, grain measured with fingers careful and counting, small game snared to keep bigger plans fed, hours spent at tables long after the candles guttered, until his army's hunger lay less at its ribs and more at the edges of its temper. Men behave better when they aren't being gnawed from the inside. He forbid the taking of captives who were children and had anyone who broke that rule brought to the nearest longhouse to listen to the women speak. There is a sound a woman makes when she claws her voice up through grief and hurls it in a man's face. Men who hear it once do not easily choose to hear it again. The rule held. At Barrow Hall he was met by Lady Dustin with a face that took pleasure in measuring him and did not hide it. "I did not think to call you Lord again," she said. "I had fitted your head to a wall and found it sat neatly among the others. My neck stays where it is as long as men like you prefer good walls," he said, and she laughed short and honest. He took Winterfell the way a man mends a breach. Not with a dramatic rush, but by making the ground on the other side of it slowly less habitable for anyone who would stand there against him. The Dreadfort men holding it understood the message after 2 weeks of watching carts of fuel and food roll in and no carts roll out. "You will starve us?" their captain said at parley, jaw clenched like a fist. "I will let winter starve you," Ned said. "You have a choice. Few men get 2. They chose badly and then better. In the end, they surrendered not because their courage failed, but because their children were thin about the wrists." Ned had them stack their arms in the yard while the women of Winterfell watched without cheering. He allowed the men to eat in the hall, seated at the last table, and he took the first bowl of stew and carried it to the thinnest boy he could see. He chose his justice not by grandness but by what would make them less likely to be the same men tomorrow. When he went to the crypts, it was not because he believed the dead could see him. It was because he needed to pass their stone faces to remind himself what standard he carried. He placed his palm flat against Lioness Stone and said nothing because nothing would do. Roose Bolton did not wait for justice. He moved like cold creeping under a door in a house where the fire has been permitted to burn low. He gathered the men who still admired the efficiency of his austerity and the sharp, bloodless pride he took when looking out over a map where he had placed his enemies. Ned met him in terrain he had picked not for glory but for the effect it had on a man's stubbornness. Low, wet ground that stole the spring from a horse and a wind that carried insults away, so men had to speak sense or keep quiet. The battle that followed did not please a bard. Horses did not carry brave men like spears. They sank, blowing and cursed. Men who had trained for a charge found themselves in a shoving match with mud. Ned moved no faster than the ground would have him. He sent in the hill men where the brush rose up like the back of something waking. He put the Manderley men where their shields could make a wall that had room enough atop it for fear and a future. He kept Great John and the other large pieces in his hand until Roose had committed his own. Roose came to the front long enough to be seen and then shifted away like fog. He had built a life on not being where anyone expected him to be. Ned built this day on being exactly where he should. It was not a duel. It was not a scene that would be recited. It was the slow exhaustion of a method. Roose's method failed first. He saw it because men like him always see. He did not run. He turned inward and made the cold place that had served him for years. Could not warm him now. Afterward, in a stand of stunted willows where the ground raised itself just enough to keep a man's boot dry, Ned looked at the men they had taken and thought of how many times he had watched a winter turn. The North was good at long things. Watches, grudges, the patient work of knitting something together with hands that never learned softness because they could not afford it. "What will you do with them?" Howland asked, "As honest and unvarnished as a spear." "Make examples," Ned said, "not only for them." He had the men whose hands were dirtiest stand before witnesses from each house. He named their crimes. He gave names to those who had died for them. If the men were proud, he made them speak their deeds into the cold air until pride withered. If they were ashamed, he made their shame do some work. He took 10 men for the wall because sometimes a man's use lies where his freedom does not. He sent others to build roads, because roads are what peace uses to find itself. He reserved 3 for judgment at Winterfell beneath the heart tree, because there are still things a lord must be seen to do himself. He did not relish the swing of his sword. He did not flinch either. The blade fell, and the north looked away less than it had when men had killed for heat. And Sansa, he kept that name under his tongue like a pebble. He worried smooth with his tongue until it was small enough to swallow. Letters went where letters could go. He did not trust the city to carry them. He trusted the unimagined. 2 good singers who owed their lives to a bare island crew, and a boy who could swim the length of a harbor in winter without crying from the cold. News came that did not let him sleep. A marriage pledged where no consent had been asked. A hasty ceremony in a place that fed on hasty things. A girl with his wife's steadiness. And his own quiet stubbornness walking a rope laid over empty space. He wanted to ride south with a small, private fury. He did not. He sat at a table and built a larger public way to not let that rope be the only thing that held his daughter up. Small courtesies moved where armies could not. He returned a hostage better fed than he had been taken. He sent blankets to a village that had given up its grain without a fight. The mummers in White Harbor staged a farce about a man who stole bread and then was nervy enough to complain about the butter. Men laughed and told the joke south. Laughter does what swords cannot. It crossed the neck briskly and warmed the city for a heartbeat or two. A man who ran the city's whispers laughed where he could be overheard and then thought about why he had. He sent a man to say in a reasonable voice that the North had chosen to fold its anger into work. The city can respond to violence. It does not know what to do with endurance. It grew uneasy. On a morning that broke brittle as glass, he stood with Catelyn's sister's boy on a ridge and looked across land they had made passable for carts together. "Will they sing?" the boy asked, hair sticking stubborn as brush. "If singing is all we make them do, we've failed," Ned said. "Let them breathe instead." Breathing meant marrying grudges to futures the way men join planks with pegs. Carefully, with a measure taken twice, listening for the sound of wood complaining. He watched the Karstarks and Umbers not shake hands, but stand under the same roof without reaching for knives, and called it progress. He presided at 3 marriages where the young looked at each other with more curiosity than fear. The vows were plain and the bread fresh, the salt sharp enough to remember. He watched women take seats further forward at councils, because the men had not covered themselves with glory while the world tipped. Roose Bolton's end came without a speech. He was cornered not in a hall of candles, but where a stream split and went 2 ways around a scrap of high ground tufted with grass. Men and mud and decisions had brought him there. Ned met him and put his blade where it needed to go. A man does not have to enjoy justice for it to work. He moved like a craftsman finishing a table he never liked but that the hall needed. He wiped his sword on grass and let the ground take the rest. He looked up and found the sky indifferent and was grateful for it. The world does not warp around tidy ends. It makes room for them and then continues. Sansa came to him in White Harbor after a tangle of politics that did not flatter anyone involved untied itself with a tug from the correct angle. She wore dignity like an old cloak and did not hurry to reach him. He did not hurry to reach her, because he had learned in the last few years that rushing toward joy startles it. They touched forearms, then hands. Then he went to one knee, not as a supplicant, but because he needed to bring his sorrow to where it could be seen by the only person entitled to weigh it. "I did what I had to do," he said, and the words were as poor as words generally are at such moments. "You did," she said. "So did I." They did not catalog their suffering to one another. They cataloged the work they had before them. She had learned what it meant to speak softly and be heard by men who only liked loud things. He had learned what it meant to withhold outrage until it could buy something worth having. Together they made Winterfell busy. She knew which lords took offense at being told and preferred to be allowed to discover. He knew which men needed someone to stand beside them while they decided. They minted a kind of coin the North had not spent before. Clemency held in a hand that could become iron quick as breath. There were moments when he wanted the old, clean story. He wanted to swing and have the world made simple by the downward arc. He wanted to name the men who had unshouldered him in the city and take their heads for himself. He had lost that privilege, or perhaps he had never had it. The North demanded better theater. He gave them a bench to sit on and a roof that did not leak. He gave them bread and a place to set it. He gave them something they could do with their hands other than carry a spear. When the last banners went home, frayed but whole, he walked the yard of Winterfell in a coat he had not had time to mend where it had ripped at the shoulder. Snow had decided to begin again, small and thoughtful. He could hear girls practicing bowshot at the butts beyond the stable and boys arguing about how much salt to use when curing meat. The words "king" in the North had become less important to the mouths that had spoken them. Home had increased its claim. He had not earned forgiveness from the entire world for the way he had left his daughter to an enemy's whim. He had earned this, the right to spend the rest of his years building something that did not live on the breath of men who liked grand oaths. In the gods wood he knelt because the posture helped some thoughts take shape. He put his palm to the heart tree and let the cold climb to his elbow. He did not ask for absolution. He asked for steadiness. He had asked for it every morning since he came north and would ask for it every morning until he could no longer ask for anything. The tree gave him what trees give, a silence large enough to allow his own voice to sound like part of the world rather than a demand made of it. The city remained. The South remained. They would reach for the North again. Kingdoms are like winter. If you beat them back one year, they return the next. He had built something that could withstand at least the first push. He could not do more than that. He had married his anger to patience and sired a hard, useful child. Toward dusk, he found Sansa standing by the well. The cold had colored her cheeks. When she saw him, she put any hand over the other, as if to warm it with its mirror. He took the pump handle and worked it, then filled a bucket and carried it to the kitchen because a lord must carry something if he wants men to remember that he has hands. She walked with him without needing to say where they were going. The house made their choices small and necessary. The smell of onions and venison and smoke wrapped itself around them. Somewhere in the hall, a man began to sing a song about a man who tried to eat like a king and ended up with his own foolishness for supper. Ned let the corner of his mouth go where it wanted. He set the bucket down and stood beside his daughter and listened while other men's voices knitted around them. Imperfect but durable. He had wanted revenge. He had taken the work that made revenge unnecessary tomorrow. He had chosen a winter's task. He would keep choosing it until the roof dripped less and the wind's voice in the halls sounded less like loss and more like a reminder to fetch wood. When he slept that night, he dreamed, not of a South that had taught him bitter lessons, but of a boy in a courtyard learning that the stump he'd struck his blade into had a grain that could either split the sword or receive it, depending on how a man read it. He woke with the certainty that he had read the grain as well as he could. He would read it again tomorrow and the next day and the one after that. This was what revenge looked like when a man older than his rage made the choice to stand under a sky that would not bend. It looked like work. It looked like Winterfell with smoke rising straight up, the smell of soup in the air, a song in the hall that was more laughter than lament. His daughter's step beside his and his people's feet marking the same paths they would take again when morning came.